So we're now officially 5 chapters into Boruto's Two Blue Vortex. And while the entirety of these 5 chapters have been absolutely incredible, there does seem to be one glaring issue, at least that a lot of people are bringing up. And that is, while we've seen power-ups for a couple of incredibly important characters, we haven't seen power-ups for a couple of other incredibly important characters. Because of the course of the 5 chapters we have of Boruto's Two Blue Vortex, it's become incredibly clear that the likes of Kawaki, Code, and Boruto have all gotten much stronger. And while it's a possibility that Code is technically just as strong as they were at the end of Boruto's first part, Code at the moment was the strongest person in the universe, so Code staying somewhere around the same level of strength wouldn't be a massive detriment. However, it is entirely too clear that Kawaki and Boruto have gotten much stronger. In fact, they've gotten more than much stronger. Kawaki now has complete and total control over the Daikokuten, being able to pop in and pop out of it to keep an eye on his 2 pseudo-parents. On top of this, while a superior Claw Grime was able to somewhat get a leg up on Kawaki, he was able to cut down numerous Claw Grimes with little to no effort. And while we technically haven't seen all that much from Kawaki, it's safe to assume, since Kawaki is one of the main antagonists of this story, that he's gonna be able to keep up with Boruto in terms of strength. And when it comes down to it, the real person who we've seen get way stronger is Boruto. As Boruto, through the addition of Flying Thunder God and Rasengan Uzuhiko, is now inarguably the strongest person in the universe. Well, maybe not anymore, but at least for a couple chapters he was. Because with the introduction of the Divine Trees, there's a possibility that these enemies may actually be stronger than Boruto. But as Boruto is the main character of the story, per usual, it's safe to assume he will end up being the strongest person in the universe. And now that Boruto is able to essentially one-hit Code, who was the strongest person in the universe for a couple of years, so strong that a year into the time skip, Sasuke understood that Boruto and Sasuke together would stand no chance against Code, it's safe to assume that Boruto has gotten exponentially stronger, which is tied largely to the fact that he is a genius. Sasuke said it himself in chapter 5. Well, with Boruto getting stronger, seemingly by the minute, one would assume that the rest of the universe would have to scale up with it, which raises a couple of key concerns. Because outside of becoming the vessel for an Otsutsuki or getting a karma marking, how do you get as strong as Boruto? Somebody that's already achieved more power than Limitless Code, who is said to be stronger than Jigen, who is stronger than Naruto and Sasuke combined, 2 people at the top of the power sphere of conventional ninja arts. Well, fortunately, that's not something you need to worry about with people like Kawaki and Code, who already have karma markings, as there's logical explanations to make them as powerful as Boruto, and it also doesn't apply to new gen antagonists like the Divine Trees or the Shinju, because we can always say, oh, Ten Tails Mumbo Jumbo evolution, they're as strong as Boruto, as when it comes down to it, as enemies and the powers that they have are new and unique to Two Blue Vortex. The problem is with everybody else trying to use pre-established techniques to get as strong as Boruto. Is it because, well, Ada and Daemon, as they're able to tap into the Shinjutsu of Shibai, are able to stay relevant in the power sphere? People like Sarada and Mitsuki, who use traditional ninjutsu, senjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu, really have no discernible route to get as powerful as Boruto. Unless, of course, they do. See, I've already filmed a video talking about how Sarada is going to reinsert herself into the sphere of relevancy of the power scheme of Boruto, which mostly ties into her possibly inheriting the Spirit Susanoo weapons of Itachi. And that video may or may not be out. It's filmed, but it hasn't been posted, and my editor kind of chooses when things go out depending on his schedule. But just know, if you haven't seen the video of me explaining how Sarada is going to be just as powerful as Boruto, so she can participate in the final battle that Sasuke was talking about, that eventually there's about a 25-minute video coming out about me talking about how Sarada is going to inherit the Totsuka Blade into the Yada Mirror. But we're not talking about Sarada today. No, we're talking about the other member of the new gen Team 7, Mitsuki. So when it comes down to it, in Two Blue Vortex, Mitsuki has been somewhat forgotten, which is a shame because Mitsuki is one of the most compelling things about part 1 of Boruto. However, the only time that we've managed to see Mitsuki in the first 5 chapters of Two Blue Vortex is when he was hanging out with Kawaki, talking about just how darn mad he was at Boruto. And this is meant to show us that the brainwashing has not only worked on Mitsuki, that is, that it's caused Kawaki and Boruto to flip in his brain, but it's also possibly altered Mitsuki's personality, because now that Kawaki is Mitsuki's son, and Kawaki is a much drearier, dark, and cruel person than Boruto ever was, it's a possibility that the cruelty is bleeding into Mitsuki's soul, making Mitsuki arguably one of the biggest concerns that one would have if they ever found themselves opposed to Kawaki. But why is Mitsuki such a big concern? Yes, we all understand that Mitsuki is the first ever perfect Snake Sage. Well, at least the first ever on-screen perfect Snake Sage. And that alone should confer a fair amount of power. However, when it comes down to the grand power scheme of Boruto, just being a perfect sage really isn't enough nowadays. As Naruto is a perfect sage, and he's nowhere near relevant in the power scheme of Boruto. I mean, he's lower top 10, but still, being a perfect sage is not enough to allow you to battle against people like the Shinji. Or in the case of Mitsuki, battle against people like Boruto. Boruto. Because if Mitsuki can beat Code, who could beat Jigen, who could beat Naruto and Sasuke, then Mitsuki is not going to be much of an obstacle to the likes of Boruto. And when Mitsuki does eventually turn to the light again and find Boruto as his son, he's not going to stand much of a chance against Shibai or the Shinju. So how does Mitsuki, one of the most important people in the grand mesh of the Boruto universe, get relevant in terms of power? Is it a new mode? Is there some second awakening? Or is the power already within him? Well, for a long time, we speculated that that power was within him. That power came from a somewhat unusual source, that unusual source being Toneri Otsutsuki. This is because Mitsuki, when he enters his Sage mode, has a chakra cloak very similar to that of Toneri. And Mitsuki, as a clone of Orochimaru, looks nothing like Orochimaru, so DNA had to come from elsewhere. Tie that into the fact that Mitsuki being able to tap into the power of Toneri would make him relevant in the power sphere, and that Orochimaru would have a couple of pretty ample opportunities to acquire DNA from Toneri, and it seemed fairly obvious that Mitsuki was going to be able to tap into the power of Toneri. However, if Mitsuki was made from Toneri's DNA, then he wouldn't be affected by omnipotence, or at least wouldn't be affected as severely as other people. And it appears as though Mitsuki has been affected by omnipotence the same, if not more, than everybody else on Earth. And while obviously Toneri wasn't a pure Otsutsuki, as Toneri was at best a quarter Otsutsuki, therefore his DNA being combined with Orochimaru's to make Mitsuki would make Mitsuki at best 12.5% Otsutsuki. You'd still like to believe that if he was at least 12.5% Otsutsuki, that he would be at least somewhat resistant to omnipotence. And yet, no. But the connections between Mitsuki and Toneri truly are too many to discount, as Mitsuki also identifies himself as the moon to Boruto's sun, the moon where Toneri and the rest of his clan lived for thousands of years. Since the evidence for Mitsuki somehow coming from Toneri seems slightly thin at the moment, that brings up the question once again: where's Mitsuki's power gonna come from? To which the only reliable answer is Kabuto. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. The mix of Mitsuki's DNA is not from that of Toneri, but from that of Kabuto. Now I know what a lot of you are saying.
Orochimaru mixed with Kabuto wouldn't make somebody strong enough to hang with Boruto.
And in premise, you're correct, but you're also incorrect. Because while yes, if you smashed Orochimaru and Kabuto together, they would not be strong enough to hang with Boruto, Kawaki, or Code. However, you splice a little human experimentation in there and make them a perfect snake sage, and that equation might wield a different answer. Because I believe Mitsuki's true power has been lying in front of our face this entire time, and it's going to be revealed very soon. And that power, when realized and shown to us, will make Mitsuki immediately one of the most powerful people in all of Boruto. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, because today we're talking Mitsuki is the strongest character in Boruto. Before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like the idea of me explaining some of your favorite anime topics, then you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. And if you want to see me explain all anime simultaneously, then go ahead and follow my anime podcast, It Talk is Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime. This week, it's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Or if you want to look like somebody who loves to explain things in anime, go ahead and meander on into my merch store, talksanonymous.net, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sticker packs known to man. So Mitsuki's power-up relies in his DNA, kind of like we always thought. With recent developments showing us that Mitsuki may not even be a little bit Otsutsuki, we gotta try and find that power elsewhere. Now, a couple of days ago, I was making a video, making a hypothetical fight between Jiraiya and Orochimaru, a battle of the legendary Sannin. And while that video is also not out yet, while I was researching that video, I remembered that Orochimaru is a lot more powerful than we give him credit for, especially now. See, here's the thing about Orochimaru. Prior to them being killed by Sasuke, they had an almost limitless bag. They had the triple Rashomon gates, Manda, Auda, Manda 2 as summons, a sort of Kusanagi, the ability to extend all of their limbs, the ability to regurgitate new bodies out of an old, fatally wounded body to make sure that they never die. And if that body dies, don't worry, they always have their true form that they can shoot out of their body to slither away. Not to mention, they also have access to the 8 branches technique, which turns them into a snake substantially larger than Manda or Manda 2 with 8 heads. And Orochimaru, with no access to their arms, was able to battle against a 4-tailed Naruto, an entity that almost killed Jiraiya. But while I was making this video, I ran into a slight quandary. See, because when it comes down to it, Orochimaru and Boruto is way stronger than Jiraiya ever was, and therefore I was racking my brain to think about what Orochimaru to match up with what Jiraiya. Because here's the thing, while you can say, oh, match them up in a battle while they were both still alive, the problem with that is Orochimaru didn't have their arms. So then you go, okay, then use the form of Orochimaru that did have their arms, either before they lost them or right after they got them back at the beginning of the 4th Great Shinobi World War. But the problem with that is if you go with the Orochimaru that killed Hiruzen, then we're ignoring 3 to 4 years of progress that Orochimaru makes in terms of discovering new ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu. And especially you ignore Orochimaru's research with Edo Tensei and how much better they got at it over the course of the time skip. Okay, then Nick, go with the Orochimaru that gets their arms back at the beginning of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. That's also not super fair, because that Orochimaru not only has white Zetsu as a vessel, but was also made using a piece of Kabuto's flesh, which means not only does that Orochimaru have access to wood release from the white Zetsu, and also a massively boosted chakra pool because white Zetsu are made from Hashirama cells, and also now a massively boosted regeneration factor. I mean, Orochimaru's always had a regeneration factor, but now it's even higher, but also because Orochimaru was made from a piece of Kabuto's flesh, that means that this version of Orochimaru now has access to all of the techniques that Kabuto, the Kabuto that battled against Itachi and Sasuke, had, which means that this version of Orochimaru has access to Jugo's Kekkei, the ability to passively pull in nature energy, Suigetsu's hydrification technique, Karin's life force and healing factor, and all of the Kekkei of the Sound Village 5, which means Shikatsu Miyaku, Kidomaru's spider abilities, Tayuya's flute genjutsu, Jirobo's chakra absorption, and last but not least, Sakon and Ukon's complete genetic control. Not to mention, since Orochimaru took a piece of Kabuto's flesh, it also vastly improved how good of a snake sage they were, as Kabuto was able to completely undergo the snake sage transformation and become a dragon sage. Now, Kabuto was far from a perfect snake sage, that's why his body was so snake-like, but Kabuto still had the ability to breathe life into inanimate objects, something that comes along with becoming a snake sage trained in the Ryuchi cave. And thus Orochimaru, the moment that they're resurrected at the beginning of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, is way stronger than they ever were before, as Kabuto, after Orochimaru's death, found a way to isolate the Kekkei of basically everybody that Orochimaru's ever talked to and shoot that into his body so that he could be as powerful as possible to kick off the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. Tie that into the fact that now that Orochimaru had Hashirama's cells, he had much better control over Edo Tensei, and you have a ridiculously broken character from the jump. So using that version of Orochimaru wouldn't be fair for Jiraiya. But while I was doing the research on this video, it made me realize that that's the version of Orochimaru that made Mitsuki. So walk with me for a second. Mitsuki is a clone of Orochimaru, right? And while there's probably some other DNA in there that makes Mitsuki not look like Orochimaru one-to-one, we know for a fact that at least a large portion of Mitsuki's DNA comes from Orochimaru. And while Orochimaru has dabbled in human experimentation for almost 2.5 decades, we know that Orochimaru didn't start trying to clone himself until after the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. And he did so with the blessing of Konoha, mind you, as both Naruto and Shikamaru were aware of where Mitsuki came from. Yeah, Konoha blessed Orochimaru doing cloning techniques, mostly because they wanted access to that kind of information in case it ever became necessary, as Orochimaru at the end of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War became Konoha's best scientist. Yeah, the man who got ran out of the village after the Third Great Shinobi World War for killing 60 children trying to recreate wood release. They were like, hey, you brought those Hokages back. Get back in here. Because you know what they say, ladies and gentlemen, one good deed is enough to erase thousands of bad ones. So what, you killed an entire generation of children. You just saved, well, I guess an entire new generation of children. Go do those silly science experiments, you human snake. But if this is the version of Orochimaru that cloned themselves in order to make Mitsuki and Log, then wouldn't it stand to reason that Mitsuki and Log would have all of Orochimaru's abilities? And really, there's no reason to refute this, because Mitsuki has a ton of Orochimaru's abilities. Mitsuki, like Orochimaru, has the ability to extend his limbs. He also has the ability to separate his body into multiple small white snakes. And while Mitsuki seems way more reliant on things like snake lightning than Orochimaru ever was, there is a clear line being drawn between Mitsuki's abilities and that of Orochimaru, which would only make sense. Mitsuki is a clone of Orochimaru after all. And if Orochimaru was trying to make the strongest possible clone, which we have no reason to believe that they wouldn't be trying to make the strongest possible clone, why wouldn't Orochimaru make sure that while cloning themselves to give Mitsuki all of their abilities, newfound abilities that they got after being remade with Kabuto's flesh? And thus it's not crazy for us to assume that Mitsuki, on top of being able to stretch his arms real long, also inherited all of the Kekkei of Hebi and the Sound Village 5, which would also possibly explain why Mitsuki doesn't look like Orochimaru. I mean, obviously Mitsuki looks a bit like Orochimaru, but not exactly like Orochimaru, because the other mix of DNA and chakra could be the Sound Village 5, Hebi, but more importantly, Kabuto. Cause here's the thing. Well, some would say if the DNA of Kabuto was gonna change how Mitsuki looked, then why wouldn't Orochimaru look different after being made with the DNA of Kabuto? Well, I would actually argue that Orochimaru now does look different in Boruto and has looked different since the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, as Orochimaru now has a much more feminine or gender neutral face than they did in Naruto, as they no longer have the, like that. The cheeks don't go in anymore. Orochimaru's face is now much softer, but also using Orochimaru's appearance as a way to prove anything doesn't necessarily work, as if there's one person in the entirety of Naruto who's known for being able to change their appearance, boy oh boy, is it Orochimaru? Getting outside of appearances, the other part of Mitsuki's DNA being Kabuto makes sense from a plot perspective. See, because the reason that Orochimaru was trying to make a clone of themselves that would be a perfect Snake Sage is because Orochimaru themselves could not become a Snake Sage. While they had enough chakra and the chakra molding ability to turn nature energy into senjutsu chakra, they didn't have a strong enough body, and thus they couldn't fully undergo the Snake Sage transformation. However, that didn't apply to Kabuto. Kabuto was able to check all three of those boxes, which is why Kabuto was able to become a Snake Sage. So this would say that Kabuto had enough chakra control, and a strong enough body. Now, who's to say as to whether or not Orochimaru, after getting a white Zetsu/Kabuto body, had a strong enough body to undergo the Snake Sage transformation? But what we do know is that Orochimaru was trying to crack the code of perfect Snake Sagedom, and therefore, if Orochimaru was truly trying to crack the code on perfect Snake Sage mode dumb, then wouldn't it make sense to use the DNA of Kabuto, who's the closest thing that humanity has to a perfect Snake Sage? Unfortunately, that DNA that would be able to confer a stronger body to Mitsuki and Log and all of the other attempts was already in Orochimaru's body. Therefore, when it really comes down to it, the reason that Orochimaru could have started their cloning ambitions is because they knew the key to perfect Snake Sagedom was in their very own DNA, as their DNA was now a mix of somebody who was almost able to achieve Snake Sagedom and somebody who could. On top of this would explain why it took so many attempts to finally get a Mitsuki who could undergo the perfect Snake Sage transformation. See, because if hypothetically Orochimaru mixed their DNA with the likes of Toneri Otsutsuki, accomplishing a Sage mode would have been pretty easy, as Otsutsukis definitely have strong enough bodies to undergo Sage mode. However, since the combination of genetic material was between Orochimaru, who couldn't undergo the transformation, and Kabuto, who could undergo it, but roughly, it would make sense that a fair amount of trial and error would be necessary to make sure that Mitsuki would be able to become a perfect Snake Sage. And therefore, Mitsuki's power-up isn't going to come from the stars, but rather an old friend. Well, like a parent's old friend. Well, more like a series of old friends, because it's the Kekkei Genkai stolen from every single person that Orochimaru ever bumped into. But I know what you're saying.
Nick, in this circumstance, Mitsuki is simply just as powerful as Kabuto, and Kabuto lost to Itachi and Sasuke,
who, mind you, were battling against him, actively trying to not kill him. So that is to say that if Mitsuki were to be able to tap into all of these Kekkei Genkai, that Mitsuki would only be as powerful as somebody who lost to a War Arc pre-buff Sasuke and Edo Tensei Itachi. And while that would be more than enough to propel you through Naruto, that is simply just not even close to enough in Boruto. And yes, technically access to all of these Kekkei Genkais would only make Mitsuki as strong as Kabuto, as there's a fair chance that Mitsuki doesn't have access to wood release because that's more tied to Hashirama's cells and less the DNA. Because if having Hashirama's DNA was a prerequisite for having wood release, then Tsunade would have it. Thus, when it really comes down to it, Mitsuki would actually be a weaker version of Orochimaru, as Orochimaru would have access to wood release and Mitsuki wouldn't. But the biggest part of this equation is that Mitsuki is a perfect Snake Sage, which, like so many other things in Boruto, is something we haven't seen yet. And the beauty of things that we haven't seen yet is that you can make up just how powerful they are. Maybe becoming a perfect Toad Sage is way easier than becoming a perfect Snake Sage. And I mean, fundamentally, it kind of is. Because while in order to become a perfect Toad Sage, you gotta do some meditation and get some oil lathered on you. To become a perfect Snake Sage, you have to get bitten by one of the scariest things in the entire universe and hope you don't die. Thus, the combination of the manifestations of these Kekkei Genkai that lay dormant in Mitsuki with a level of Sage mode that we've never seen before could definitely blast the door wide open for Mitsuki as he tries to return to being relevant in the power sphere, which he's gonna have to be, so an answer has to be found somewhere. And considering the fact that there's really no reason for us to believe that a clone of Orochimaru wouldn't have all of Orochimaru's abilities, this seems most logical answer to me. But what do you guys think? Do you believe that there's a more logical answer to explain where Mitsuki's gonna get a level of power that will allow him to stand next to Kawaki or Boruto? Or do you believe that Mitsuki's gonna be forgotten by the story, a bygone factor of part 1 of Boruto? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Is Mitsuki gonna be Shino? Is that what's gonna happen? Part 1, you're like, wow, can't lose, wins every fight. Could be broken down the line. And part 2, just gone forever. I really hope not.